The first major clue in Brianna Maitland's disappearance was found before her family even knew she was missing. But instead of becoming the beginning of a rescue, it became the first mistake. On March 19, 2004, 17-year-old Brianna finished her shift at a small Vermont restaurant, got into her green Oldsmobile, and drove into the dark. She never made it home. Hours later, her car was found backed into an abandoned farmhouse, doors open, wallet untouched, paychecks left behind. But Brianna was gone. So what really happened on that lonely road? Did she crash while trying to escape? Or did someone force her car off the road and take her into the dark?
Brianna Maitland disappeared.
The FBI will join Vermont State Police for an update on the case. Haunting cold case in Franklin County. 21 years after she vanished, still no sign of Brianna Maitland.
Well, today marks 22 years since the disappearance of a young woman in Vermont's Franklin County. Brianna Maitland.
New information tonight about the disappearance of a Franklin County teenager who was last seen 18 years ago.
The 17-year-old was last seen the night of March 19, 2004, when she was finishing up at her shift at a restaurant in Montgomery.
Before Brianna Maitland became a case file, she was a 17-year-old girl trying to make her life feel less small. She grew up in rural Vermont, near the Canadian border, where the roads were narrow, the nights were silent, and distance was part of everyday life. Her family home was surrounded by land, privacy, and quiet. To some people, that kind of place feels peaceful. But to a teenager who wants friends, work, freedom, and a future of her own, quiet can begin to feel like a cage. Brianna was not weak, she was not helpless. People close to her described her as smart, independent, and capable. She had grown up outdoors, she knew how to handle herself. She had a stubborn strength that made her seem older than she was. But even strong people can be vulnerable when they start moving through the world alone. And that is where this story begins to turn. By 2004, Brianna had started spending more time away from home. She stayed with friends, worked jobs, and tried to live closer to people her own age. From the outside, that might sound like rebellion. But sometimes a teenager leaving home is not running away from family. Sometimes she is running toward adulthood. So here is the first question this case forces us to ask. When does independence stop looking like freedom and start becoming exposure? On March 19, 2004, Brianna's day did not look like the final day of someone planning to disappear. She had responsibilities. She had work. She had people expecting her. She had belongings she would still need the next morning. Nothing about her movements suggested a carefully planned escape. That evening, she went to work at the Black Lantern Inn in Montgomery, Vermont. It was a small restaurant in a small town, the kind of place where routine can make danger feel impossible. A shift ends. A young worker walks outside. A car starts. Headlights cut through the dark. Life continues. Except for Brianna, it did not. Public reports say Brianna left work around 11:20 p.m. She got into her green 1985 Oldsmobile 88 and drove toward the friend's house where she had been staying. She never arrived. Now focus on the distance. The place where her car would later be found was roughly a mile from the restaurant. Not 10 miles. Not across the state. Not somewhere hidden deep in the woods. Roughly 1 mile. A mile is barely enough time to finish a song on the radio. It is barely enough time for a driver to settle into the road. And yet somewhere inside that tiny stretch of Vermont darkness, Brianna Maitland's ordinary night became a mystery that has lasted for more than 20 years. What can happen in 1 mile? A wrong turn? A sudden stop? A familiar face waiting near the road? Or headlights appearing behind her, closing the distance before she had time to understand the threat? The next image in this case is the one people remember. Brianna's Oldsmobile was found backed into the side of an abandoned structure known as the Old Dutchburn Barn. The position was strange, almost staged in its confusion. It did not look like a simple roadside breakdown. It did not look like someone calmly parked and walked away. The doors were open. Her belongings were inside. Her wallet was still there. Her uncashed paychecks were still there. But Brianna was gone. That matters because people who vanish by choice usually take the things that help them survive. Money, identification, transportation, medication, something. Brianna left behind the very items a runaway would need most. So the theory begins to bend under its own weight. If Brianna wanted a new life, why abandon the car that could take her there? If she needed money, why leave her paychecks behind? If she left willingly, why did the scene look like panic? At this point, the story is no longer just about a missing teenager. It is about timing, opportunity, and interruption. Someone may have known she worked late. Someone may have known her route. Someone may have known she would be alone. And Brianna's life, like most real lives, was not simple. There were friendships, there were relationships, there were arguments. There were people who loved her, people who worried about her, and possibly people who felt betrayed by her. The car gave investigators the first physical mystery, but Brianna's relationships would reveal the first emotional one. Because before we can understand what happened on that road, we have to understand who was standing close enough to know where she would be. Brianna Maitland did not vanish from a life that was empty. She vanished from a life full of movement, pressure, and people who knew where to find her. By March 2004, Brianna was no longer living full-time at her family's remote home near the Canadian border. She had been staying with a childhood friend in Sheldon, closer to work, school, friends, and the kind of teenage world she felt she had been missing. To her parents, that distance was frightening. To Brianna, it felt like breathing room. That is the tragedy of this case. What looked like freedom from one side may have looked like exposure from another. Brianna was trying to grow up quickly. She had taken her GET exam, she was working. She was moving between friends, jobs, social circles, and relationships that were not always stable. Her life was not perfect, but it was active. She was not disappearing from the world. She was becoming more visible inside it. And visibility can attract the wrong attention. So who exactly had Brianna's attention in those final weeks? According to case accounts, tension had already entered her circle before she vanished. At a party less than a month earlier, Brianna was reportedly involved in a confrontation with another young woman. The conflict was said to involve jealousy and a boy. What started as anger became physical, and Brianna was allegedly struck in the face. That moment matters because violence leaves more than bruises. It leaves humiliation. It leaves resentment. It leaves unfinished business. Brianna reportedly did not turn the fight into a bigger scene. She did not respond with the same force. Instead, she later told her parents and pursued the matter through official channels. On paper, that was the mature response. In real life, it may have made the tension worse. Because if someone already felt embarrassed or exposed, what happens when the person they attacked is now willing to involve the police? Would that person move on? Or would they wait for a moment when Brianna was alone? There was also the question of romance. Brianna's relationship with an on and off boyfriend appeared complicated. They had reportedly broken up and reconnected in a short period of time. In a teenage circle already filled with jealousy, parties, and rumors, that kind of instability can become dangerous quickly. Not because heartbreak always leads to violence, but because closeness creates knowledge. Someone close to Brianna could know her car, her schedule, her route, her habits. Someone close to her might know she worked late, drove alone, and did not have the safety net most people carry today. She did not have a cell phone. That detail changes everything. If she sensed danger on that road, she could not call her mother. She could not call a friend. She could not call police if another vehicle appeared behind her, or someone familiar waved her down. Brianna had only her instincts, her car, and the darkness around her. And then there is the detail that still feels impossible to ignore. Public reporting confirms that on March 19, Brianna had taken her GET exam, had lunch with her mother, and later went to work at the Black Lantern Inn. She was last seen after finishing her shift around 11:20 p.m. That sequence feels normal. A test, a meal with her mother, a shift at work, a drive home. But the people around her knew those ordinary details. They knew the shape of her life, and if someone wanted to confront her, they did not need to search for her. They only needed to understand her routine. That is why the next piece is so disturbing. One person close to Brianna reportedly came across her car in the early morning hours after she disappeared. The car was not sitting normally. It was backed into an abandoned building. The scene was strange enough that strangers stopped and looked at it later that morning. But this person did not immediately alert police. He allegedly turned off the lights, closed the doors, and left. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he had been drinking. Maybe he convinced himself it was not his problem. But if you knew Brianna and you saw her car crashed into an abandoned farmhouse before sunrise, how do you drive away without asking where she is? That is the moment this chapter turns from background into suspicion. Because by the time Brianna's family knew she was missing, The car had already been seen. The scene had already been touched. The timeline had already begun to blur, and the most frightening possibility was now impossible to avoid. Brianna may not have vanished because no one knew where she was. She may have vanished because someone knew exactly where she would be. The car should have changed everything. Not later. Not after a missing person report. Not after the family started demanding answers. The moment Brianna Maitland's green Oldsmobile was found backed into the side of the old Dutchburn barn, the entire case should have shifted from routine to emergency. Because cars do not end up like that without a reason. Brianna had left the Black Lantern Inn around 11:20 at night. She was supposed to drive back to the friend's house where she had been staying. The drive from the restaurant to the barn was short, roughly a mile. That detail is terrifying because it leaves almost no room for a long, complicated story. Something happened fast. 1 minute, she was leaving work. The next, her car was sitting in one of the strangest positions imaginable. Backed into an abandoned structure, doors open, belongings still inside, Brianna nowhere to be seen. Imagine standing there in the cold Vermont air and looking at that car. The road is quiet. The barn is abandoned. The vehicle is not parked naturally. It is not hidden carefully. It looks like a moment frozen in panic, as if whatever happened did not have time to finish cleanly. So what was it? A crash? A struggle? A failed escape? Or the first visible sign of an abduction? Public reporting says Brianna was last seen after leaving the Black Lantern Inn, never arrived at the friend's house where she was living, and her vehicle was later found backed into an abandoned barn about a mile away. That article gives the basic outline, but the scene itself gives the fear. If Brianna had simply walked away, why leave the car in such a bizarre position? Why leave behind the things she would need? Why not take the money, the wallet, the transportation, anything that could help her survive? And if this was only an accident, where was the injured driver? A person who crashes at night usually does one of three things. They stay near the vehicle, they walk toward help, or they leave some trail of movement behind. But in Brianna's case, the car became a silent witness, and the silence around it grew louder with every passing hour. This is where the investigation should have tightened. The area should have been protected. The vehicle should have been photographed from every angle. The ground around the car should have been treated like it might hold the last movements of a missing girl. Footprints, tire marks, broken items, signs of a struggle, the position of the doors, the lights, the objects outside the car. Every detail mattered. But the first response did not match the weight of the scene. The Oldsmobile was handled like an abandoned vehicle before it was understood as the central clue in a possible disappearance. It was towed away. The location was disturbed. And by the time Brianna's family learned what had happened, the earliest and most valuable window had already begun to close. That is the nightmare inside this chapter. Not only that Brianna disappeared, but that the one place that might have explained how she disappeared was not locked down in time. What vanished from that scene before anyone knew to look for it? A footprint in soft ground? A second set of tire tracks? A mark on the car? A dropped object? A direction Brianna may have run? In missing person cases, the first hours are not just important, they are unforgiving. Once evidence is moved, touched, weathered, or forgotten, it rarely comes back the same way. And if someone harmed Brianna, those early mistakes may have protected them more than any alibi ever could. The car should have been the moment everything stopped. Instead, it became the moment confusion took over. Brianna's family did not know police had already found the vehicle. The people searching for her were not working with the full picture. And while everyone tried to understand whether she was missing, running away, or simply out of contact, time kept moving. That delay matters because if Brianna was alive after the crash, then the barn was not just a strange location. It was a countdown. Maybe she was forced from the car. Maybe she tried to fight. Maybe she was injured. Maybe she was still close enough to be found. That possibility is what makes the car so haunting. Because it may not show where Brianna's story ended. It may show the last place someone could have interrupted what was happening and saved her. Brianna Maitland's case did not stay frozen because there were no theories. It stayed frozen because theories are not proof. For years, people looked at the same pieces and tried to make them fit. The car backed into the abandoned building, the open doors, the missing keys, the wallet left behind, the uncashed paychecks, the short drive from the Black Lantern Inn to the old Dutchburn barn, the earlier conflict, the complicated relationships, the people who knew her routine. Everything felt important, but none of it was enough. That is the cruelest kind of mystery. Not an empty case, but a case full of fragments that refuse to become a complete picture. Then, years later, investigators revealed something that changed the tone of the investigation. DNA had entered the story. Not a rumor, not a theory, not a name whispered in a small town. A physical trace. For the first time, the question was no longer only who had a motive, or who behaved strangely, or who may have known where Brianna would be that night. The question became much sharper. Whose presence could be tied to evidence near the car? According to reporting, Vermont authorities used advanced forensic genetic genealogy to help identify the source of DNA connected to the investigation. They had developed a DNA profile from evidence found at the scene, collected samples from 11 persons of interest, and later said DNA from one of those individuals matched DNA on an item found near Brianna's car. That sounds huge, and it is, but it is not the same as a solved case. Police were careful to say the match did not mean they had identified a suspect. The person was described as cooperative, and the investigation remained active. That caution matters because DNA can answer one question while creating 5 more. How did it get there? When did it get there? Was it connected to the night Brianna vanished? Was it innocent contact, or part of something darker? This is where the twist becomes more complicated than a headline. A DNA match can bring investigators closer to the truth, but it does not automatically reveal the full story. In a case where the original scene was not preserved perfectly, every conclusion has to be built carefully. One careless accusation could damage the investigation instead of helping it. But emotionally, this update changed everything. Because for Brianna's family, DNA meant the case was not just living on memory anymore. It meant something physical had survived. Something from near that car still had the power to speak after years of silence. And that forces the case back to the night itself. If Brianna was targeted, the plan did not need to be complicated. She worked late. She drove alone. She had no cell phone. Her route was predictable. The road was rural, dark, and quiet. Someone who knew her schedule would not need to search for her. They only needed to be there. But why would anyone be there? That question pulls every earlier tension back into focus. The party confrontation, the jealousy, the unstable relationships, the possibility of someone feeling embarrassed, betrayed, or threatened, the local drug scene, the people who knew Brianna was trying to live independently, but also knew she was vulnerable at night. None of those details prove who took her, but they explain why planning is possible. A stranger would need luck. Someone close would need timing. And timing was everywhere in this case. The person responsible may have known when Brianna's shift ended. They may have known what car she drove. They may have known she would be alone. They may have known the dark roads between the restaurant and home better than any outsider could. That is what makes this chapter so unsettling. The DNA did not close the case. It narrowed the darkness. It suggested that somewhere near the most important scene in Brianna's disappearance, there may still be a trace of someone who needs to be explained. And maybe that is why the case remains so painful. Because the truth may not be completely gone. It may be close enough to touch, close enough to test, close enough to name, but still hidden behind the one thing DNA cannot break by itself: silence. For Brianna Maitland's family, the case did not begin as a mystery. It began as a silence that felt wrong. At first, there was room for ordinary explanations. Maybe Brianna had stayed with a friend. Maybe she had changed plans. Maybe she was tired after work and had not called. When a 17-year-old is trying to live independently, a late night does not always look like an emergency. But then, the silence stretched, and the ordinary explanations started to collapse. Brianna had not come home. She had not contacted the people who loved her. She had not cashed her paychecks. She had not taken the things a person would need to disappear. Then her family learned the detail that made the fear sharper. Her car had already been found, not safely parked, not hidden, not abandoned in a normal place, backed into the side of an old barn, about a mile from the restaurant where she was last seen. Imagine being her parents and hearing that. Your daughter is missing. And the most important clue in the case was already in police hands before you understood she was gone. The place that may have held her last movements had been disturbed. The car had been moved. The first hours were gone. That is the emotional damage at the center of this case. Because when a child disappears, a family does not only search for evidence, they search for time. The hour she may have been close, the witness who may still remember, the road that may still hold a track, the decision that might have changed everything. For Brianna's family, those moments became questions they would carry for years. What if the scene had been protected immediately? What if the car had been connected to Brianna faster? What if someone treated the Oldsmobile as the beginning of an abduction investigation? There is no easy way to live inside questions like that. And while the family searched for answers, rumors started filling the empty space. Some people wanted to call Brianna a runaway. Others focused on parties, drugs, jealousy, and the people around her. But rumors can be cruel in missing person cases. They can turn a daughter into a debate. They can make the victim look responsible for the violence done to her. They can distract from the simplest truth. Brianna did not come home. She was 17, and her family still deserved answers. 20 years later, the case reached another painful milestone. On March 19, 2024, the FBI and Vermont State Police announced a reward of up to $40,000 for information leading to Brianna's recovery. That announcement was not just an update. It was a message. Someone may still know something. A memory, a conversation, a detail from that night, a name that was never spoken, a secret that has become heavier with time. Vermont State Police described the case as not cold, but unsolved. That wording matters. Cold sounds abandoned. Unsolved means the door is still open. It means investigators still believe movement is possible. It means Brianna's name has not been filed away as history. But for a family, unsolved is a brutal word. It means there is still hope, but no peace. It means another anniversary can pass with headlines, reward posters, and renewed attention, but still no daughter walking through the door. It means every new lead can feel like a lifeline, and every dead end can reopen the wound. That is why the reward matters beyond the money. It creates pressure. Pressure on the person who knows more than they have said. Pressure on anyone who heard a confession, saw a suspicious vehicle, remembers a conversation, or has carried one small piece of the truth for 2 decades. Because Brianna's case may not be unsolved because the truth disappeared. It may be unsolved because someone chose silence. Someone may know why her keys were missing. Someone may know whether she was followed, lured, forced off the road, or taken after the crash. Someone may know whether the barn was the end, or only the place where the world lost sight of her. And that is the final cruelty of this case. Brianna's family has had to grieve without proof, hope without closure, and fight without knowing exactly who they are fighting against. But they have not let her fade. Brianna Maitland is still missing. Her case is still open. And somewhere behind the years, rumors, and fear, there is one answer that could finally end the silence. What happened to Brianna after she left the Black Lantern Inn? Brianna Maitland's story does not end with an arrest. It ends with a road in rural Vermont, an abandoned barn, a green Oldsmobile, and a family still waiting for the sound every missing person's family dreams of. The truth finally coming home. More than 20 years have passed since Brianna left the Black Lantern Inn. In that time, theories have changed, leads have appeared and disappeared, and science has moved forward. But the center of the case has never changed. A 17-year-old girl drove away from work and never made it back. Maybe someone saw something that night and stayed quiet. Maybe a name was mentioned once and forgotten. Maybe one person has lived for years with a detail that could finally explain everything. This case has required extensive research, and there are many angles that cannot all be fully covered in one video. If you are interested in reading the complete investigation, I will add the resource links in the description so you can study the case in more detail. Until that truth comes out, one question remains. What happened to Brianna Maitland after she left the Black Lantern Inn?